from all over the world. We used to be just a little regional Central California talk show interviewing authors, and COVID came along. We couldn't have guests in the studio anymore, and we had to learn a new technology, Zoom, which has allowed us to talk to people all over the world about their, not just their books, but their process. And we talk to publishers and people who help people get books out, and it's just a great, I'm having a good time doing this show. I'm kind of excited to talk to our next guest all the way in Louisville, Kentucky, JoyceLynn Barnett. Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
My pleasure. Before we go too far, I'm going to pop this book cover up, Rosa's Big Comeback. But before we get to the book, tell us about you, Joyce. You lived in Louisville. You lived in Washington, D.C., back in Louisville?
Yes, and New York in between.
Wow. New York City?
I left, I was born and raised here in Louisville and graduated from Thomas Jefferson High School in 1975. And I always knew that I wanted to go to the big city. That was just one of my dreams. And in my early 20s, I moved to D.C., Washington, D.C., exciting time for me. Ronald Reagan was president then, on his way out. No, I'm sorry, Jimmy Carter was when I got there. And then Ronald Reagan, and Marion Barry was mayor.
That's right.
And yeah, and so I spent my time there, went into the nursing field to make a living, and married, had children, and as the children were getting older, we decided that we wanted to come to a slower paced city to raise the kids, and that's what we did.
Went back to Louisville.
Yes, back to Louisville. Now, in 2004, my marriage ended, and I continued in nursing, but I used that as a time to use my artistic gifts. I've always loved writing, and my first published piece was an article that got published in the Atlanta Voice newspaper. So
wow.
once that happened, I was ready to fly. So so from there, I was reinventing myself as a single woman, as they say, reinvent.
Reinvent.
And I ended up getting a phone call from a woman in Washington, D.C. said, look, I know you're familiar with the city. It's not going to scare you to move back temporarily. She offered me a contract to do a year as a life skills instructor to homeless women.
Wow.
So that ended up being a twofold blessing because what I witnessed and experienced doing that job gave me the idea for Rosa's Big Comeback.
By the way, Rosa, by the way, seems to have a lot of things in common with you, living in Louisville, living in Washington, D.C., changing careers. But the biggest thing, and you gave something away when you said when you graduated from high school, because I could tell you we're the same age, Joyce, and I love books about 60-year-old people. There's not enough of them.
Yeah, actually, Rosa is a character, the main character in the book. I was determined to make her a 60-year-old woman instead of 30 because when I was working as a life skills instructor, that's who I kept meeting. Mostly women in that population that were homeless. Sad to say. And so when I heard their stories about how they became homeless and, their journey, I knew that I was going to write a book. But I didn't do it right away. I was in D.C. 2 years from 2012 to 2014, and uh, I didn't write Rosa's Big Comeback until 2018.
Mm,
But it was such a heavy story.
yeah.
I don't know if you read it or read some of it. I mean, the grueling challenges of homeless women. Um, I had to get comfortable. I knew I was going to write it.
Hmm.
I just needed to get comfortable.
Now, Rosa, you've done a lot of things. You've been a host of a cable access show, and you've written other books. Is that right?
I have, but they were not uh, published on the format as Rose's Big Comeback.
Right.
I have. Uh, by the time I did Rose's Big Comeback, we had all the internet accessible tools to help us, um, and it was a little bit more challenging to get published, even though I had some works. But I would self-publish them and anyway,
Yeah.
and um, and then push them as far as I could during that time.
Sure.
Uh,
Rosa,
I mean, I'm
Rosa, I
sorry,
called
go
you
ahead.
Rosa. Sorry, Joyce. Who should be reading this book?
Anyone that works, let me recommend it to um, people social workers,
Hmm.
um, anybody really, but specifically social workers and anyone that works in the field of dealing with the homeless
Right.
population. But I think this is a good read for
Yeah.
anybody.
I was going to say we're all being touched by homelessness right now. Everywhere, anywhere I live, everywhere we look, there are homeless people. And the question is always why? Why are they homeless? Do you think this book could kind of help expose and get us to understand how people got there?
At least some. People become homeless for different reasons, and some never pull themselves up, and others have the um, mental problems, and um, so I. But the population that I worked with were women uh, who found themselves homeless after a divorce,
Yeah.
after some type of life trauma, and they just uh, it got away from them how to control their life.
How to get it back under control. But Rosa, I don't want to give away the story. Rosa does pull it together. Well, the title of the book is called Her Big Comeback, so that kind of gives us a hint. I'm excited to read it because I read a little synopsis on it, and I just feel like it's going to be a very inspiring story. And maybe for women who end up being alone and not being homeless, I think it could still be inspiring for them too.
Right, right. Well, the punch to this story or the hook is that a person can hit rock bottom in life,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that you have to stay there.
Yeah.
The idea is to motivate yourself and make a comeback like Rosa did.
Yeah. Good. Joyce, we are way past time. I could talk to you all day. You're fascinating. And the way you shape stories is great. Any last thoughts for our viewers? Where can they get the book?
Okay, the book is not currently on Amazon, but if you Google the title of the book, Rosa's Big Comeback, you'll see the various places that have it
Okay.
and can ship it to you.
Very good.
Um, yeah, it's still out there.
Hmm. Well, for our viewers, order this book, but don't just order one. Order a couple of copies. Give these to people. I think it's going to be very inspiring for a lot of people. Joyce, I want to have you back on. We'll talk about this some more. Are there any more books coming up?
Oh, yes, I'm writing my memoir.
Oh, great.
So I can talk about DC a little more and the New York story.
Yeah.
You would want to hear the New York story.
I think it's going to be a fascinating memoir. Thank you so much, Joyce, for coming on the show. And as I said, we'll have you back. And for our viewers, don't go anywhere because we're going to have more authors coming up right after this.